Number 1.
The murder of Julia Wallace, also known as the locked room murder by many, is the oldest unsolved murder still on Merseyside police's case files. The events surrounding Julia's death, along with the conviction and subsequent acquittal of her husband William Herbert Wallace, became one of Liverpool's most baffling mysteries. Julia was bludgeoned to death in her home in Wolverton Street, Anfield, in January 1931, in a case that has confounded detectives for decades. The Wallaces were an unusual couple. William was often ill with kidney problems and Julia, 60, was suspicious of strangers and led a sheltered life. One former friend described their marriage as loveless and strained. On Monday, January 19, William left his house to visit Liverpool Central Chess Club in North John Street, where he was a member. There, he received a phone message. The caller, who had spoken to club captain Samuel Beattie, identified himself as Mr. Qualtrough and asked Wallace to call at 25 Menlove Gardens East at 7:30 p.m. the next day. The man said, "I want to see him particularly." William was perplexed. He had no knowledge of any man called Qualtrough, but made a note of the name and proposed meeting. The next night, after finishing work for the Prudential Assurance Company, William set off from home, telling Julia he would be back as soon as possible. He boarded a tram at 7:10 p.m. in Lodge Lane, regularly reminding the conductor of his destination. After getting off the tram, he went on a fruitless search of Mr. Qualtrough's address, which it turned out did not exist. Giving up the search, William returned to his home at 29 Wolverton Street at 8:45 p.m. to discover the body of his wife, who had been brutally bludgeoned to death inside a locked house. There was no sign of a murder weapon and no clues left behind as to who killed her. What unfolded was a murder case so gruesome and unusual it inspired crime novels, TV dramas and a whole host of theories from amateur sleuths. More than 90 years later, the impossible murder that baffled detectives remains unsolved, and the cold case remains one of Liverpool's greatest mysteries. On the anniversary of Julia's murder, we revisited the facts of the case. A mysterious caller tells Wallace to meet him at a fake address on the night of January 19, 1931. William Herbert Wallace attended the Liverpool Central Chess Club at the City Café on North John Street. He was a member at the City Centre Club, but not a particularly reliable one. This trip to the club in January was his first in months. The club's schedule had him down for a game that night, but this didn't mean very much. Wallace had missed games in the past, and the schedule offered no guarantee he would actually turn up. Shortly before Wallace arrived at the club, the captain Samuel Beattie took a call from a man calling himself R.M. Qualtrough. The caller told Beattie he wanted to meet Wallace to discuss insurance business and told him to meet at 25 Menlove Gardens East the following night at 7:30 p.m. Beattie noted down the message and passed it on to Wallace. Despite a somewhat patchy attendance record at the club, the caller seemed convinced Wallace would be there that night and would get his message. After the murder, a switchboard worker at the Liverpool Telephone Exchange would help police trace the call to a phone box just 400 yards away from Wallace's house, next to the stop where he caught the tram to Chess Club that night. Curiosity got the better of Wallace, who decided to set out in search of the mysterious Mr. Qualtrough, as instructed. The following night, on January 20, 1931, he caught the 5 tram at 7:06 p.m. from Anfield to Menlove Gardens. Wallace's strange behavior that night would make sure his movements were remembered by no fewer than a dozen witnesses who saw him on his wild goose chase around South Liverpool. On the tram, he repeatedly struck up conversation with the conductor and the ticket inspector, asking them to tell him where he needed to get off. He made a point of telling them he was a total stranger in that part of the city, repeating his unusual story about R.M. Qualtrough and stating the time they were meant to meet. His odd behavior didn't stop when he got off the tram at Menlove Gardens. Wallace stopped residents, went into newsagents, and even asked a policeman for their help in finding the location of his appointment. As the night went on and the meeting time of 7:30 p.m. started passing him by, it became clear there was no Menlove Gardens East. There are a couple of Menlove Gardens in the area, with streets bearing north, south and west. But there was never any east. Sensing he had spent a cold, winter night chasing a fool's errand, Wallace turned home. As well as the numerous witnesses who saw Wallace on his journey around Menlove Gardens, he was spotted on his way back through Anfield by a 20-year-old typist. Lillian Hall said she saw Wallace at around 8:35 p.m. talking to another man on Richmond Road, close to his home on Wolverton Street. At around 8:45 p.m., John and Florence Johnston spotted their neighbor William Herbert Wallace stuck outside his home at 29 Wolverton Street. He looked out of sorts, and when the couple stopped to see what was going on, he told them the front and back doors of the house wouldn't open. Claiming the locks on the house wouldn't budge, a confused and concerned Wallace asked his neighbors, "Have you heard anything unusual tonight?" The Johnstons walked round to the backyard of Wallace's home, where the locked door opened without a problem. Wallace walked into the house, which was blanketed in total darkness on the winter night. After lighting a lamp and entering his home, Wallace came back out and said, "Oh, come and see, she's been killed." When the couple entered the Wallace home, they found Julie sprawled out in the sitting room in front of the gas fire. She had been violently beaten to death. The room was a scene of utter horror, with Julia's lifeless body lying in a pool of her own blood and splatters from the attack sprayed across the walls. Her dress was partially burnt and a coat was laid out underneath her, which was also badly burned from the gas fire. Staring at his wife's battered and beaten body, Wallace turned to his neighbors and said, "They finished her, look at her brains." On first appearance, Julia's death looked like the result of a burglary that had gone terribly wrong. The locked kitchen cupboard where Wallace kept his insurance money had been forced open, and the cash inside was gone. However, nothing else in the house had been taken, including Julia's handbag, which was left inside totally undisturbed. Other than the bedroom, which looked like it was rifled through, the rest of the house was in order. At the time of Julia's murder, a serial burglar nicknamed the Anfield Housebreaker was at large in the area, but this attack didn't seem to fit with the rest of his crimes. John Johnston called Merseyside police, who soon arrived at the Wallace home, and fingers were soon pointed at the obvious suspect, Julia's own husband. Merseyside police arrived at the Wallace home shortly after Julia's body was discovered, but their handling of the case was a far cry from their intelligent forensics work and crime scene analysis we have come to recognize today. A major strike in 1919 had left the force seriously weakened, and with a significant number of staff dismissed, those left behind were charged with filling roles they weren't properly qualified for. After police arrived at the scene, a journalist from the Liverpool Daily Post was called out to act as the police photographer. His haunting images of the crime scene and Julia's body remain a chilling reminder of the gruesome nature of her murder. A forensics expert from Liverpool University called John Edward Whitley McFall was also called out to determine the cause and time of death. Rigor mortis is a stiffness of the limbs which starts to set in as early as 4 hours after death. Before intelligent forensics techniques were developed, this stiffness could be used to determine an approximate time of death. Looking at the state of Julia's body, McFall stated she must have died at around 8 p.m. Crucially, this time of death was nearly an hour before Wallace arrived home. Spouses and partners are always obvious suspects when someone is murdered, but in the case of Julia Wallace, her husband appeared to have the perfect alibi. Both the tram conductor and ticket inspector could place him on the tram at precisely 7:06 p.m. A number of witnesses saw him around Menlove Gardens around the time his wife was being murdered. In Anfield, more witnesses came forward to claim they remembered seeing Julia alive at around 6:30 p.m. or 6:45 p.m. If Wallace had murdered his wife, he would have only had around 15 minutes to carry out the killing, change his clothes, wash off the blood, and make it to his tram for 7:06 p.m. Police examination of the drains around the house showed they hadn't even been used that night, so the murderer had to have escaped the scene covered in Julia's blood after carefully locking all the doors. Despite having a watertight alibi, Wallace was charged with his wife's murder and found guilty after a brief trial in April 1931. The jury deliberated for a short time before unanimously deciding Wallace was guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death by hanging, with an execution date set for the following month. However, an appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeal in London determined there was not enough certainty to support the jury's guilty verdict, and he walked away a free man. After losing his wife and being subjected to a grueling trial, Wallace sought out a quiet life and moved away to a new home in the Wirral. However, just a few months later he fell ill with his recurring kidney problems and died in 1933. Since Wallace's death, the case of Julia's murder has never been solved. The mystery has attracted countless theorists and armchair detectives to put forward their own suggestions for who was behind the crime. Julia's murder even inspired a number of murder mysteries, including P.D. James' 1982 crime novel The Skull Beneath the Skin, as well as featuring in the 1991 film The Man from the Prue, starring Jonathan Pryce and Anna Massey. Despite the morbid fascination and intrigue surrounding the case, Julia's murder remains one of the greatest mysteries in Liverpool's criminal history. A 1936 article by crime writer Dorothy L. Sayers summed the bizarre case up by saying, "The Wallace murder had no key move and ended, in fact, in stalemate."
Number 2.
A young boy found hanging in his Edge Lane home, a house ransacked by burglars and a cold case that has baffled detectives for 70 years. In February 1946, the body of Charles Greeney was found by his teen cousin, sparking a police case that still has no conclusion decades later. Charles's death threw up a number of questions for detectives investigating the case. Was it a burglary gone wrong, a terrible accident, or something else entirely? The case of Charles Greeney's death has never been solved, with the scene of this case that shocked Liverpool long since razed to the ground to make way for modern developments. In March 2019, The Echo revisited the cold case known as the Riddle of the Hanging Boy in an article about how it unfolded. When 14-year-old Ernest Johnson called round to see his cousin Charles on a Saturday night, he made a horrifying discovery that would haunt him forever. The teenager had travelled to Edge Lane from his home on Watford Road in Anfield to visit 11-year-old Charles Greeney. Charles lived in the 3-story Victorian end of terrace house at number 62 with his mum Mary, who ran a pawnbroker's, and dad Charles SNR, who was a plasterer. That Saturday night, February 2, 1946, Charles's mum and dad had gone out to a local hotel for a drink, leaving Charles reading his Boy Scouts book at home. However, by the time Ernest arrived at the house on the corner of Dorothy Street, he found the front door wide open. Walking into the house, Ernest found his young cousin hanging from a clothes error in the family's kitchen. He ran to find Charles's parents, but it was too late. Charles was dead, and his parents quickly realized the rest of the house had been ransacked by burglars. A number of expensive items were missing from the house, and police feared Charles had been murdered as part of a burglary gone wrong. Detectives realized they were dealing with a murder by hanging and launched an investigation. However, this cold case has prompted a number of theories from amateur sleuths, with some suggesting Charles's death could have been a tragic accident. This is the true crime story of the Riddle of the Hanging Boy, an unsolved murder which has left investigators baffled. Detectives acted quickly after Charles's body was discovered and arrested 6 men in less than a week. An article in the Adelaide Advertiser, published 1 month after Charles's death, named the accused as Seaman James Welsh and Charles Lawrenson, motor driver Charles Patrick Hamilton, taxi driver John Kay, and decorator Henry Joseph White. Thomas McGlynn, another seaman, was also arrested in Gibraltar and flown back to England. In court, the prosecution raised the possibility that Charles was knocked unconscious before being hanged. The same article published during the court case said the prosecuting counsel said that Greeney died from rapid asphyxia. There was no evidence of a violent struggle, and therefore the explanation might be that the boy was incapacitated by a violent blow. There was no evidence of accidental or suicidal hanging. The prosecution submitted that all the accused had committed burglary together, and the hanging would require 2 men to carry it out. When Charles's body was pathologically examined, there was evidence of bruising that would suggest a heavy blow to the head before death. There was a possibility the schoolboy was already unconscious when he was hanged from the clothesline, with an inquest ruling that he could not have carried out the hanging himself. Ultimately, only 4 men would face charges of murder and burglary, with Kay and Hamilton claiming they never entered the house despite taking part in the burglary. The article, published on March 20, 1946, says there was no direct evidence as to which of the accused hanged the boy, and the prosecution alleged constructive homicide against the other 4 accused. 40 witnesses are thought to have been called over the course of the case, and in May 1946, the court finally returned a verdict of not guilty. Unable to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that the men killed Charles, the judge summed up the case by saying, "Although we are not certain that it was an accident, we are not certain that it was not." Charles's death remains unsolved to this day. Detectives initially thought the burglars had unexpectedly found Charles as part of the break-in and murdered him to prevent themselves being caught. However, there were others who believed the thieves may have discovered his body already hanging in the kitchen when they broke in. Writing about the case on his true crime blog, historian Stephen Horton explains how the defense in the court case managed to cast doubt over the death. Led by Rose Heilbrunn, the defense pointed to the fact Charles had been reading a scout's book about knots the night he died. By suggesting that his death could have been the result of some sort of experiment gone horribly wrong, the defense case were able to foster a sense of uncertainty in the courtroom. Unable to find the men conclusively guilty of Charles's murder without any reasonable doubt, a verdict of not guilty was returned. All the men were sentenced to between 3 and 4 years in jail for burglary, but the investigation into Charles's death failed to put anyone behind bars for the bizarre killing. The Edge Lane house where Charles was found was left to decay as a derelict building for a number of years until it was finally demolished as part of regeneration works in 2010. Anyone walking down the busy road today would have no idea of the imposing Victorian property that once stood at the corner of Edge Lane and Dorothy Street, and the haunting history that was torn down with it.
Number 3.
The murder of Jaw Kay is one of the oldest unsolved crimes to remain on Merseyside Police's cold case files. Mr. Kay's body was found in the flat above the laundry he ran at 44 Scotland Road, and property which has since been demolished. The alarm was first raised when someone arrived at Mr. Kay's laundry and found it locked, prompting a call to police. His body was found in bed, having suffered up to 19 stab wounds which ran up the left side of his body. But Mr. Kay's body wasn't the only grim discovery made by Merseyside police officers on February 2, 1946. A clipping from the Belfast newsletter on Monday, February 4, 1946, states that Mr. Kay's murder was discovered the same day as the killing of 11-year-old Charles Greeney on Edge Lane. Charles's murder, and the mystery surrounding it, came to be known as the riddle of the hanging boy and has puzzled armchair detectives for decades. We revisited both murders, which represent two of the longest-standing cold case files on Merseyside Police's list of 159 unsolved murders in Merseyside spanning the last 90 years. The body of Charles Greeney was found by his teen cousin, sparking a police case that still has no conclusion decades later. Charles's death threw up a number of questions for detectives investigating the case. Was it a burglary gone wrong, a terrible accident, or something else entirely? The case of Charles Greeney's death has never been solved, with the scene of this case that shocked Liverpool long since razed to the ground to make way for modern developments. When 14-year-old Ernest Johnson called round to see his cousin Charles on a Saturday night, he made a horrifying discovery that would haunt him forever. The teenager had travelled to Edge Lane from his home on Watford Road in Anfield to visit 11-year-old Charles Greeney. Charles lived in the 3-story Victorian end of terrace house at number 62 with his mum Mary, who ran a pawnbroker's, and dad Charles SNR, who was a plasterer. That Saturday night, unable to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that the men killed Charles, the judge summed up the case by saying, "Although we are not certain that it was an accident, we are not certain that it was not." Charles's death remains unsolved to this day. An article published in the Belfast newsletter on Monday, February 4, 1946, said, "Liverpool detectives conducted investigations yesterday into two murder mysteries, both discovered on Saturday night." The victims were a 56-year-old Jaw Kay, who was found in bed with multiple stab wounds, and an 11-year-old boy, Charles Greeney, found dead, entwined in the ropes of a kitchen dryer at his home in Edge Lane, which had been entered by thieves. Carpets, jewelry and a clock are missing. Kay was found by a policeman. It is believed that he had been dead for 2 days and money is missing. Mr. Kay, 57, had arrived in the UK in August 1913 after emigrating from China. He was stabbed to death in his bed at his laundry at 44 Scotland Road, with detectives discovering the laundry and rooms had both been ransacked. When a doctor examined his body on February 3, he said he believed Mr. K had died 60 hours earlier. It was determined there was no disease sufficient to have caused Mr. K's death by natural causes, and it was ruled to have occurred as a result of shock and hemorrhage following injuries caused by a sharp instrument. At the time of Mr. K's murder, police said they were trying to trace a middle-aged man who was seen leaving the laundry via the yard door.
Number 4.
Alice Barton was strangled and mutilated, and her body dumped in a wartime pillbox in the Fender Valley area of Woodchurch, Birkenhead, on Saturday 24 September 1955. It was thought that by the time she was found, that she had been dead for 2 or 3 days. The lower part of her body was described as having been mutilated. It was also said that an obscure 3-word sentence had been scrawled on her body in lipstick, which were described at the inquest as being 2 letters and an arrow that were on her left thigh. When she was found, all of her clothing except her stockings had been thrown over the upper part of her body and face in a pile. In August 2010, it was reported that the police were investigating new leads into her murder, but nothing more is known of that. It was reported that someone on the internet had suggested that the murderer had been their grandfather. Whilst her body was found in the pillbox on Saturday 24 September 1955, it was not until her picture was published in the Liverpool Echo on Monday 26 September 1955 that she was identified the following day as Alice Barton by a widower with whom Alice Barton had previously lived with up until a few months earlier. However, several people that had known her had come forward before her identity was determined, but it was reported that they had not known her name. It was also suggested that the publishing of her photograph in the Liverpool Echo in order to identify her was controversial, but it is not known exactly why, but it is possible that the photo was taken of her after her death. The police also later issues a composite photograph of her clothing. Alice Barton was initially described as aged between 50 and 60. 5 feet 2 inches tall. Slight build. Gray eyes. Graying hair. No teeth. Hair around the mouth and chin. Not wearing a wedding ring. Wearing a lemon-colored linen costume with glass buttons, green leather court shoes with high heels, black suede gloves and a dark brown herringbone tweed coat. Following her identification, the police stated that they had found that she had been something of a wanderer and had been of no fixed abode. Shortly after she was named, the police said, "All we can say is that this woman has been known in the name of Alice Barton. She was known from Christmas last year in this locality until March. That is the name she gave. I don't know whether it is a married name or a single name, but she spoke of having been married and that she had a son of some years. She spoke with a strong Lancashire accent and spoke of Bristol, Wigan, and Manchester. I want to trace anybody who knows her and her antecedents, or anybody who can help me as to her activities recently, or any of her associates or persons she may have been seen with." Alice Barton was later said to have been a prostitute. It was said that she had turned to prostitution after her husband left her, and that she had been taking customers, mostly lorry drivers, to the pillbox for sex. At the time of her murder, it was reported that it was thought unlikely that she had been using the pillbox as a place to sleep. Her body was found in the pillbox by an 11-year-old schoolboy who had lived nearby in Walby Close on the Woodchurch estate, whilst he had been out picking blackberries. Following the discovery of her body, the police combed the area around the pillbox for clues and used mine detectors in a bid to find the murder weapon. It was thought that she had been strangled. Shortly after her body was discovered, the police said that they were looking to trace a man, generally referred to as the pointed chin man, whose description was given as aged 35 to 45. 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 7 inches tall. Medium build. Dark hair. Clear complexion. Long nose. Dark eyebrows. Pointed chin. Clean shaven. Unkempt appearance. Dressed in dark suit and brown shoes. Wearing or carrying an old Macintosh. They said that Alice Barton had been seen with the man on the Wednesday in the Woodchurch area. It was also said that the man had been seen on the morning of Wednesday 21 September 1955 in the Morton and Arrow Park districts, at which time he was heard to speak of being the owner of a coach and had, during the railway strike, conveyed workmen from Ramsgate to Margate. The police said that they had also further determined that the man had spoken of having been in hospital at some point and having lent the coach to another person, and that on its return had found that the seats had been slashed. The police said that they were also trying to trace a man that made an anonymous telephone call to the Central Police Station at 8:08 p.m. on the Saturday from a local call box at the junction of Manor Hill and Grosvenor Road in Birkenhead. By 5 October 1955, the police said that they had interviewed more than 20,000 people in connection with the murder. It was also noted that at the time of her murder, that there had been more than 200 ships in port across Merseyside, and that they had spent a lot of time interviewing crews upon their arrival in Liverpool. It was also reported that hundreds of building workers on the Woodchurch estate were interviewed. The police also said that they had visited many garages and coach proprietors in Wirral, as well as having visited Ramsgate and Margate to try and trace the man with the pointed chin to see if he had been employed there as a coach driver. They also questioned all Birkenhead bus conductors and drivers, as well as those that had worked on the 77 route between Woodside and Morton, which passed Arrow Park and Woodchurch. Alice Barton's funeral took place on Saturday 1 October 1955 at Landiken Cemetery near Birkenhead, about half a mile from where she was murdered. Her inquest, which concluded on Thursday 27 October 1955, returned a verdict of murder by some person or persons unknown. In August 2010, it was reported that a woman on the internet had claimed that she thought that the murderer was her grandfather. The woman, who was 19 years old, said that according to a story that had been passed on down through her father's family over the years, that suspicion had fallen on her grandfather, who had frequented a pub a few minutes away from the pillbox and who was said to have come home on the night of the murder with blood-stained clothes. She said, "One night, he came home wearing blood-soaked clothes, demanding my nan to burn them. My nan was so horrified and in shock that she went to throw them in the wash immediately, but he ordered her to burn them there and then." She then added that a few days later the murder of Alice Barton was announced in the press. However, it was noted that the grandfather that the woman was referring to was no longer alive. It was said that the police looked into the information as a viable lead, but nothing more was ever reported on it.
Number 5.
Harry Baker was found dead in some rhododendron bushes in a field off of the A50 Warrington to Knutsford Road near High Lea in Cheshire on 23 June 1958. He had gone missing on 6 June 1958, 30 miles away in Bootle. It was thought his body had been there for about 2 weeks. His body was found by a road worker that had lived at Primrose Hill Farm in High Lea. His wife had reported him missing at 11:15 p.m. on 6 June 1958 after he failed to come home as usual. His death was due to head injuries and asphyxia. The pathologist that carried out his post-mortem said that, although Harry Baker had 34 head wounds and 13 small fractures to the skull, he died from strangulation. His body had been wrapped up in sacks with his feet tied together, and it was determined that he had been strangled with a nylon stocking which was found tied around his neck. His body was found only 6 feet from a footpath alongside the A50 road, which was described as a busy road and had been dumped over a 4 feet high barbed wire topped wire fence. Forensic analysis showed that Harry Baker had not been killed at the place where his body was found. The police said, "We think he has been brought in a vehicle and heaved over." It was determined that a gold-colored wristlet watch, a 9-carat gold pocket hunter watch, and a fountain pen had been taken from his, and the police said that tracing them was of vital importance. The 9-carat gold hunter watch had been inscribed from Jesse to Harry, 2 September 1924. It was also determined that Harry Baker's dark brown raincoat and his single-breasted jacket from his grey worsted suit were also missing. Harry Baker was otherwise fully dressed apart from his coat and jacket when he was found. It was said that every piece of identification had been removed from Harry Baker's body. However, the police did find a return railway ticket dated June 5 from Bankhall near Bootle to Stockport in his clothing. His son noted that Harry Baker would travel every day from Southport to Liverpool to make collections. The police said that it was thought that Harry Baker would have had about £25 on him when he was murdered. However, it was noted that would have been much less than he might have had if he had been attacked later in the day. Analysis of the stocking showed it to have been champagne-colored and a size 9 1/2 inches. The sacks that had been used to cover Harry Baker's partly decomposed body were an ordinary household coal sack and a potato sack. The words Scotch, Aaron, Pilot and Gavham were stenciled on the potato sack. His head and upper part had been enveloped in one sack and his legs in another. The police said that they thought that at least two men, or a man and a woman, had carried Harry Baker's body away, and that he was murdered in the Bootle area, or just over the Bootle-Liverpool boundary. The police said that they had three theories regarding his murder: that it was prearranged by people that knew how Harry Baker went about his weekly business collecting money from housewives, and that they had attacked him in a quiet street, where he was then hustled into a house or another building where he was done to death. That he was induced by a potential customer to enter a strange house away from his normal rounds and then set upon by people that were complete strangers to him. That he entered the home of a customer with a view to settling accumulated debts and that tempers were lost and Harry Baker was knocked unconscious, and that after having struck him and then realizing the position was serious for them, that they had decided to tie a stocking round his neck to ensure that he died. It was said that no matter where the murder took place, that it was thought that his body might have been kept in a building in Bootle or the north end of Liverpool before being removed by car, van or lorry to where it was found 30 miles away near High Lea on 23 June 1958. Harry Baker was Jewish and had been a credit draper and lived in Melling Road, Southport. He had gone missing on 6 June 1958 whilst making his round of calls on customers in the Bootle area. His wife said that at the time of his disappearance, that Harry Baker was a friendly and popular man and said that he had never been missing before. After his body was found, the police called at an accommodation office in Upper Parliament Street, Liverpool, where they took away a register of his customers. It was determined that he had left home at about 7:30 a.m. on the Friday morning, 6 June 1958, to collect from customers in the Bootle area, and after making several calls in Bootle he was seen in Anderson Avenue, Bootle at about 12:45 p.m. It was later thought that he had been seen in Strand Road, Bootle, with a man between 1:30 p.m. and 1:45 p.m. It was said that he had been seen talking to the man, but that the police had no description of him other than that he was thin-faced and wearing a grey suit. The police appealed for the man to come forward, but he was never traced. The spot where he was said to have been seen talking to the man was at the number 23 bus stop near the Derby Arms in Strand Road. It was noted that there was a 15-minute service of buses from Strand Road to Lime Street in Liverpool from the stop, and it was known that Harry Baker would often have a quick lunch in a Reese's restaurant in Dale Street, Liverpool, when he was on his collection days in Bootle and Liverpool. However, it was not known whether Harry Baker had taken the bus into Liverpool for his lunch or whether he had gone somewhere else. It was also suggested that it might have only been a coincidence that he was talking near the bus stop and that he had in fact had other calls to make in Bootle before he left for Liverpool. The police said that one of the main things that they wanted to determine was where Harry Baker had had his lunch on the day he vanished, as well as other Fridays when he was collecting in the Bootle-Liverpool district. The police said, as he was working in a particular district, the odds are that he would not go out of that district to have his midday meal, so we can expect the restaurant or cafe to be either in Bootle or North Liverpool. He was a man who never took sandwiches with him. We know his movements up to between 12:30 and 1 p.m. Information following those times is not at all certain. A timetable of his last hours was thought to have been 12:40 p.m. Harry Baker was seen talking to the driver of a large black saloon car of the limousine type at Rimris Road near Rimris Bridge. 12:45 p.m. Harry Baker was seen in Anderson Road. 12:50 p.m. Harry Baker was seen walking round Bibby's Lane. 12:55 p.m. Harry Baker made his last call in O'Neill Street. 1 p.m. Harry Baker called on a customer in Milton Street. 1:45 p.m. Harry Baker was seen near the number 23 bus stop. It was noted that Harry Baker had been in the habit, when races were being televised or broadcast, to ask at his client's house whether he could watch or listen to the race, and on the day he vanished the Oaks was being broadcast. It was not known what had happened to Harry Baker after 1 p.m. It was said that he should have called at a house in Virginia Street at 1:10 p.m., but he didn't make the call. The man that lived in Milton Street, where Harry Baker called at 1 p.m., was a process worker. He said that when Harry Baker called at his house, that he seemed to have had something on his mind. He said that Harry Baker was normally a jolly man. He said, "My wife termed him a perky little sparrow, and I thought that was an apt description." He said that Harry Baker was in his house for about 4 to 5 minutes and said that he thought that Harry Baker had had his daughter in mind, as Harry Baker had told him that she was expecting a baby, and said that that appeared to cause him some worry. He said that Harry Baker visited him regularly every Friday, but that on 6 June 1958 he had not been wearing a hat or carrying an umbrella as he normally did. He said that, after leaving his house, that Harry Baker went towards a bus stop, noting that the bus would have taken him eventually to Liverpool. The police said, "It is difficult to understand why a man of such methodical habits and strict timekeeping in making his calls should suddenly vanish in the middle of them. If he did leave Bootle alive, we have to find what caused him to leave instead of carrying on his usual round of collections. Anyone who know of any reason why anything like this should happen is asked to come forward. We would be glad to see them." In the normal way, Baker made his calls in the north end and then moved through the various street of customers to the south end of the city. On Friday, June 6, he apparently made his last call at 2 houses in Anderson Avenue, Bootle, just before 1 p.m. Then about a quarter of an hour later, the police had been told Baker was seen talking at the number 23 bus stop in Strand Road, Bootle. According to the report, he was seen talking to a man with a long thin face at 1:45 p.m. Then he vanished. We would like this man to come forward. He could be of some help in tracing the last movements of Mr. Baker. Baker was due to call at a house in Virginia Street, Bootle, at 1:10 p.m. that day. He did not make the call. When the police went to the customers in Virginia Street and questioned them, they said, "We thought it rather odd when Mr. Baker did not call. He was always so punctual." It was noted that a man with a similar description to that of the man with the thin face was seen at a garage in Rimrose Road, Bootle at about 7 p.m., where he bought 3 gallons of petrol and asked the way to Knutsford. He was described as being dirty and excited and to have had a black or dark green van with a twisted bumper. It was not known whether the man with the thin face was the same man that had been seen talking to Harry Baker near the bus stop earlier in the day. It was also not known whether there was a connection between the man seen at the garage and the sighting of a dark-colored van with a battered bumper that had been seen on the A50 roadside at High Le the night after Harry Baker was thought to have been murdered. The police also appealed for the driver of the large black saloon car of the limousine type that Harry Baker was seen talking to at 12:40 p.m. to come forward. The police said, "Despite all the appeals made by us, the driver of the large ramshackle type of limousine has not come forward." The driver was wearing a shiny peak cap when he spoke to Baker. The driver sat in the vehicle while Baker stood on the pavement. After a short conversation, the driver got out of the car. It was then noticed that he was about 6 feet tall and quite heavily built. He returned to the driving seat and drove off towards Seaforth, while Baker walked off in the Liverpool direction. After a few minutes, the large car was seen to turn back and go in the same direction as Baker. We know that Baker later made a further call, and it is possible the driver of the car followed Baker and waited for him leaving the house of a customer. We know that, while Baker was talking to the car driver, he was seen to look at his watch and then point in the direction in which he eventually went. It would help our investigations enormously if the driver of the vehicle could be traced. The police focused their initial search after his body was found to the Bootle and North Liverpool area, where they searched derelict or unoccupied premises and demolition sites. It was reported that 200 detectives massed around a half-mile radius from the spot in the Liverpool Dockland area, where Harry Baker was last known to have been, in order to carry out a dragnet and systematic search of all premises. They worked inwards to the center, searching talking to people and making notes, with a detective saying, "We know Baker was in that area, and there is no evidence that he left that district on the Friday afternoon. Something should come out of this search." It was reported that the police were convinced that Harry Baker's murderers lived somewhere in the Dockland area. On Thursday, 26 June 1958, it was reported that the police were checking a spot where 3 cyclists had seen a small dark fawn gabardine raincoat thrown from a car that had 2 men in it. It was noted that Harry Baker had been wearing a similar jacket when he was murdered, but that it was not with his body when he was found. The police also questioned 600 of Harry Baker's customers, mainly housewives. The police also carried out investigations in the Liverpool and Huyton areas, where the majority of his customers lived, as well as visiting lodging houses in the Bootle and Liverpool areas. They were also said to have kept watch on all-night cafes. The police also appealed for anyone that had seen anyone handling a bulky package on any of the 3 days, 6, 7 and 8 June 1958, to come forward. The police said that they thought that whoever might have murdered Harry Baker might have kept his body hidden in a house and then later carted it away wrapped up in sacks in a van, lorry or car. The police appealed for help from lorry drivers, including the drivers of any vehicle that had been in the Bootle or Liverpool area on 6 June 1958 and had gone off in the direction of Warrington, High Le and Knutsford areas. The police also appealed for the owners of any goods vehicles in the Bootle and Liverpool area who had either loaned or missed their vehicles on the 3 days and asked them to come forward. The police also posted notices appealing for anyone who had traveled along the A50 on the 3 days and who either parked or saw any cars parked on the road at any point about a mile on the Knutsford side of the Poplar Cafe or about half a mile on the Warrington side of the Bear's Paw Inn, or otherwise saw anything suspicious to contact them. The police also carried out a roadblock on the A50 in order to question drivers, and it was said that Home Office experts worked in the drizzle with mine detectors in the search for clues. They were said to have searched many square yards of heathland surrounding the spot where Harry Baker's body was found, as well as covering the grass verge on the other side of the road. However, nothing of any value to the investigation was found. 2 vehicles were reported to the police as having been seen near the area, a car and a van, and the police appealed for anyone with any information concerning them to come forward. They were seen parked near the spot where Harry Baker was found on 7 June 1958. People from the car were seen to enter the field near to where Harry Baker's body was found, and 3 men were seen with the van. The police also searched garages, both public and private in the area, and asked garage proprietors and dealers if anyone had spoken of or hinted at disposing of a vehicle that might have been used in the crime. The police also visited scrapyards with similar questions. The police said that they thought that there had been a woman involved in the murder or that there was a woman that held the secrets of the killing. They said a woman is either shielding the murderer or a man is shielding a woman who might be the responsible party. We are more than ever convinced that a woman is involved somewhere in the brutal killing, and we are not losing sight of the fact that a woman may have been the owner-driver of the vehicle that removed the body, or she may be the person responsible for seeking the loan of a vehicle for the removal of the body. It is possible that a woman enticed Mr. Baker into a strange house on the pretext of becoming one of his customers. We appeal to any of Mr. Baker's customers who have any recollection of recommending a new client to him or recommending a neighbor or friend to deal with him, to come forward and give us all the information which we will treat in the greatest confidence. The more the detectives are trying to unravel the mystery of where Baker actually met his death in Bootle or the north end of Liverpool, the more we become convinced that some people can explain his movements after he left customers in O'Neill Street and Milton Street to travel to Virginia Street. We know that he always called on a customer there at 1:15 p.m. on Fridays, but on June 6 he did not arrive. Baker was always a very meticulous businessman, and so far as we can find out his books were in absolute order, and it is the surprise disappearance after his leaving O'Neill Street, Milton Street area that makes us believe that he was very likely inveigled into visiting the home of a potential new client and robbed and killed. The police were also reported as having said that they thought that Harry Baker might well have known his murderer well, or that his murderer was aware of his movements. On the afternoon of Wednesday 25 June 1958, CID officers went round the premises of cleaners in the Bootle and Liverpool areas and asked staff whether they had had any bloodstained clothing handed in for cleaning. The exact motive for his murder was not known, as it was not thought that it would have been worth murdering him for £25, a gold watch and a fountain pen, and it was suggested that his murder might have been planned by someone who was familiar with his regular collections in Bootle and thought that he might have had more money on him than he had. Harry Baker's relatives said, "We are certain that whoever committed the crime did it for money. But we are sure he couldn't have had much money with him after only making calls in the morning. We can't understand how anyone could harm such a friendly man." It was also suggested that the murder might have been planned, but that the dumping of his body where it was found wasn't, it being suggested that the dumping or his body by a main road indicated that the murderer had panicked. It was suggested that Harry Baker had been murdered in one of the 4,500 houses across the 60 streets in the vicinity of Strand Road, Bootle, and then later dumped off the A50. During the investigation, the police received a number of calls from a woman that said she had information regarding Harry Baker's murder, but they had been unable to trace her. She had first called on Thursday 6 November 1958 saying that she had vital information. She then called on Sunday 9 November 1958 at about 11:04 p.m. from a call box in Litherland Road in Bootle near Waterworks Street, but when the police arrived to meet her, there was no one there. The newspaper referred to her as Bootle's Will-o'-the-Wisp woman. The police made repeated appeals for the woman to call again and said that the question of whether she had genuine information to give or whether the calls were a hoax was still unanswered. The police said that it was possible that the Will-o'-the-Wisp woman might have been shielding a husband or lover. The police also received hundreds of anonymous letters during the investigation, but they said that they had yielded no tangible results. One of the letters related to a man that lived in Brook Road, Bootle, and said that he had been seen hiding a bloodstained shirt under his jacket, but that lead was followed up early in the inquiry and the police determined that there was no link to the murder. However, the police said that they remained convinced that someone in the square mile area of Strand Road, Bootle, where Harry Baker was last seen alive on 6 June 1958, was concealing vital information. The police said that during the investigation that they had spoken to about 30,000 people, taken 900 statements and sent out 10,000 questionnaires. Harry Baker's inquest took place in Alrincham on Thursday 24 July 1958, and a verdict of murder by a person or persons unknown was returned. When the coroner summed up, he said, "It is quite obvious that the murderer or murderers, and I should say accessories after the fact, made quite sure, as they thought, that this body would never be recognized, otherwise we would not have had the mutilation of the head and face. It was also thought that he might have put up a fierce struggle, as there were marks on his hands to indicate such." A representative for Harry Baker's family at the inquest said that it was a particularly dastardly crime. Harry Baker had died intestate, and when his estate was settled on Saturday 13 December 1958, it was found that he had left £15,472, £13,855 net. His widow was one of two people granted letters of administration.